All right, welcome, folks. So this is an environmental company spotlight. I am Fred Pollander. I am the Assistant Director for Career Development and Experiential Learning in the College of Earth, Ocean, and Atmospheric Sciences. Thank you so much for being here today, those of you online and here in the room. I am very pleased to welcome our guests from Wolf Water Resources. So I'll give them a chance to introduce themselves. This event today is the result of something called networking, which I encourage you all to do a lot as part of professional development. I went to a career fair in fall term and spoke with engineering firms, mainly construction engineering firms. And I walked up to them and asked, what kind of roles do you have in your organizations where you need folks that know environmental permitting and can be environmental consultants on projects? And they had a lot of great elucidating advice for me to say there are roles for environmental scientists in a variety of private organizations. So among the networking I did, I was introduced to Wolf Water Resources, and through a lot of emailing and planning, we got to where we are today. So I want to introduce Natalie and Lauren, and I'm really excited that you're both here today. Thank you.
Thanks, Fred. Like Fred said, my name is Natalie Holt. I'm the director of the Ecological Sciences group at Wolf Water Resources.
And I'm Lauren Zatkos. I'm an aquatic and wetlands specialist at Wolf.
So we are colleagues, and we're here today to talk about our work, about environmental consulting in general, and provide some resources and career tips for folks who are interested in work in the environmental sciences.
Yeah, and just to introduce ourselves a little bit more and give you guys an idea of our professional background so far, we're going to go into a little bit more detail before we delve into what environmental consulting and specifically river restoration consulting can look like. So I started my path into my scientific career the same way that you guys are. So I got my 4-year degree in environmental sciences in Pennsylvania, where I'm from. And during that time, I helped my undergrad advisor with a lot of the research he was already doing. So I just tagged along, and he focused mainly in limnology and macroinvertebrate communities. And after I graduated with my bachelor's degree in 2014, I kind of knew that I would probably be wanting a master's degree because I knew I wanted a job in ecological sciences, but I realized that I wasn't quite ready to kind of narrow down exactly what I wanted to do yet. So I made the decision to work for a few years first. So I had a variety of very different seasonal positions, and a lot of field work, especially in Pennsylvania. It's super snowy right now. So a lot of that field work was from spring to fall. So in the winter, I also did kind of random jobs at cafes and hotels. And during the winter was also the time I took the opportunity to do some online courses. I had realized during my seasonals that my GIS skills were really subpar. So that is also something I was doing. And then my combination of seasonal work and that GIS experience landed me my first full-time consulting job, which was mostly doing wetland delineations and stream assessments. And then I moved out to Oregon in 2017 to start my master's degree here at OSU in fisheries science. And during that time, I was pretty much solely in either the field or in the lab doing research, and also getting more familiar with statistical analyses and more GIS. And then after I defended my thesis and wrapped that up in 2019, I stayed at OSU for another year and a half, 2 years as a faculty research assistant, continuing my food web research I'd been doing and working as a lab manager. And then 5 or 6 years ago, I got what was my second job in consulting. So I helped what had been a civil engineering firm start up their environmental services. And then in 2023, I got my job at Wolf.
Awesome. Like Lauren, like all of you are doing, I also got a bachelor's of science degree. I studied forestry and natural resources at UC Berkeley. While I was there, I did a lot of research with a couple labs on forest ecosystem sciences, specifically focusing on succession. I was very interested in that in undergrad, and how forests respond to natural disturbances like lightning, fire, and floods. Having those like research experiences in undergrad was really great for me. I learned I really loved field work. The photo on this slide here is when I had the opportunity to get paid to go to Panama and do research on mangrove forest succession, which was amazing. After I graduated, I did about 2 years of full-time, like 40 to 50 hour a week, 365 field work. I was a botany technician at a national park in the Bay Area. And then I was a utility forestry inspector for like a large public utility. I eventually moved into kind of like office environmental consulting, working on a biological risk assessment for another large public utility. Like Lauren, I also felt like I wanted to invest in myself and invest my time in building skills outside of work, just to have more transferable or like saleable skills to apply to other jobs. So I pursued a GIS certificate at a college in the Bay Area, and also took classes on major environmental laws like NEPA and the Clean Water Act, because I saw in like open positions I was interested in that they were interested in applicants who were familiar or had experience working with those laws. And then in 2020, I moved to Portland and started working at Wolf Water the next year. So thanks. I guess in my undergrad experience, when I would talk to my like faculty advisor, or look at resources for like post-graduation career possibilities, environmental consulting would always come up. And I never was really sure what that meant. So we wanted to share just a little bit today to provide like a base level understanding of what that means. Just broadly, environmental consultants help clients solve problems or answer questions related to the environment. So that could be really addressing any discipline. Like there are consulting firms and consultants who work on like air quality issues, water quality, hydrology, geology issues, or even wildlife biology. So when looking at potential environmental consulting firms that you might be interested in working for, a couple considerations to ask yourself while you're like researching these companies, or ask potential employers in like an interview setting, who their clients are, and what kind of projects you might want to work on. I think those responses to those kind of answers will tell you kind of if the work that that company does is generally like in alignment with your values, and ultimately, hopefully, it will lead to like longer term job satisfaction. So a little bit about our firm. We are an environmental consulting firm. Specifically, we're an environmental engineering firm. About half of our company are environmental engineers. Many came from OSU's environmental engineering program. And then we have about a quarter geoscientists, like hydrologists, geomorphologists, and then about a quarter ecologists, which include me and Lauren. We work on a lot of different projects. I think we're well known for floodplain reconnection and river restoration projects. We also work on green infrastructure, infrastructure related to living in cities and having a society, like water lines, sewer lines, things like that. We're often pulled into those projects to provide guidance related to restoration and minimizing impacts to wetlands and waters. We also work on like recreation infrastructure, like trails and bike paths and things like that. And the clients we work with really across the board, federal agencies like the Forest Service, BLM, cities and counties, tribes, nonprofits, watershed associations, even sometimes private individual clients. The quote at the bottom is from one of the scientists on staff. I like it because it illustrates how we work with nature and partner with people to deliver cool projects. So the problems that we try to answer or inform on are defined by nature. The solutions proposed are led by scientists, and then the final product is ultimately delivered by engineers. Okay, So Lauren and I are gonna share today two projects that we worked on to kind of give you a sense of the type of projects that our firm does and demonstrate how we as ecologists can plug into those projects. So I'm going to talk about the Finn Rock River Restoration Project. This is one of the first projects I did complete environmental permitting for at our firm. This is just east of Eugene on Highway 126. The Finn Rock site is a floodplain, or was a historic floodplain of the Mackenzie River, which is the sole drinking water source for the cities of Eugene and Springfield. The project site was in the 2020 Holiday Farm fire footprint, those like big Labor Day fire events. And like I said, it was a disconnected floodplain kind of perched above a single thread of the Mackenzie River. And the site itself had undergone gravel mining historically. It's a multi-million-dollar project. We had federal, state, and utility partners to implement the project, plan it, and also fund it. Okay, this is a simplified graphic of what the type of river restoration projects that we work on often look like. There is a lot of river confinement that happened in Western Oregon historically. On the top section of the graphic, you see a levee on the left side of the river and a road on the right side of the river. Rivers, I think naturally in many systems in the West, are multi-threaded, sinuous, not confined to a single path. But the top section of the graphic illustrates that single channel thread, which is really convenient for infrastructure. You know, levees are often built to protect property behind them from frequent flooding. Roads, we often want to have annual year-round access and don't want to have those roads impacted by flooding. So the Mackenzie River is one river that was confined to generally a single thread. But we proposed, or the Forest Service rather, they designed what's considered a Stage 8 Valley Restoration Project. What that involves is a lot of sediment redistribution, literally filling that single threaded channel with sediment, which disperses the water across the broader floodplain. That creates a variety of like smaller sinuous channels, which are great for habitat. And it also slows down water throughout the system. So water is also interacting with large wood, which we propose to install. It creates a lot of complexity, a lot of roughness. There's tons of habitat benefits for this for salmonids, creates a lot of niches, which are important for all stages of salmonid life cycles and their macroinvertebrate prey. Yes, thank you.
That's a good question.
Yeah, go for it.
The previous slide.
Yeah.
That image with that, so that's sort of like to give any stakeholder a sense of the project, right?
That's right, yeah.
It's not highly technical, it's kind of just for anyone to grasp.
Yeah.
So how many more documents or resources would you say are represented by that project, you know, at that stage?
Documents or resources?
To communicate sort of the scope of the project. So this seems like a nice kind of thumbnail sketch of it, right?
Yes, super simplified.
And then like how many more documents at this stage are kind of being created behind the scenes?
I mean, tons. I think this came out of a kind of like post-construction paper from another site in the Mackenzie River watershed. Finn Rock, this project I'm talking about, followed a similar like design as this one. But this is like largely a communication tool. I think Kate, our client at the Forest Service, wrote the paper to share out what happened on this project, Deer Creek, and provide a guideline for other practitioners, whether they're federal agencies or private landowners, other consulting firms, whatever, to follow this style of river restoration. But for Finn Rock specifically, I mean, there's technical drawings, which I'll show in a couple slides here. Engineers at the Forest Service, in this case, design plan sets in CAD to show all the proposed actions. For funding, people are like writing grants. For permitting, we're preparing really detailed applications describing the project site, what's proposed, how we're in compliance with all the relevant environmental laws. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll go into more detail too.
Nice.
Okay, right on. So this is the Finrock site. The image on the left is pre-project. I mentioned earlier that there was historically gravel mining at the site, which is evidenced by that huge pond in the middle of the site. Super deep, pretty warm water, not great habitat for fish, turtles, or other critters. The project was divided into 2 phases because a lot of our river restoration work is confined to the summer months or an in-water work window, when in-water actions are less likely to disturb or kill fish, especially juveniles. So the middle image is from the end of 2021. You can see there's a lot more channels in the southern or downstream portion of the project area. And some of that sediment has been redistributed into those ponds, creating leaf islands, which are great like basking habitat for turtles. And then the image on the right is the final state of the project site. You can see that the boundaries of that pond are almost, hard to tell at all that there's a pond there. We've carved these huge channels in it, redistributed sediment. There's a lot more complexity. That water spreading out across the floodplain, raising the water table, creating lots of great habitat for fish and turtles.
We kept the road on the top bit, that curves, that was removed.
The road was not removed in this case. Yeah, in the last image that was from another project site. So we couldn't reconnect the floodplain all the way across the valley. We did need to maintain access and flood protection for that highway because it's the one highway that's like running along the Mackenzie River. There's Forest Service roads on the right side, or I guess like the bottom side of the image. Good question. So like I mentioned earlier, this is like the kind of graphic that the Forest Service or designer is developing during like project concept stages. Engineers at our firm also create images like this. This is just showing where cut and fill actions happen. Those black hash polygons are where a sediment was removed or carved out and redistributed across the site for specific habitat objectives. You can see some of those like leaf islands in the middle of the former gravel mining pond in the middle there. We also proposed a ton of large wood placement. I think over 3,500 logs were placed on the site, largely from salvage logging from Forest Service properties that were affected by the Holiday Farm fire. Next slide. The video. Hopefully this technology works.
Yeah, don't want to mess up the, oh, there we go.
Look at it go. Okay, awesome. So this video shows the site conditions immediately after phase 2, the final phase of the project. You can see all the large wood in there. Some of those leaf islands look really bare. And a reminder, this project area was hit by the Holiday Farm fire. It was a really high intensity fire, so that's why there's all those like standing dead trees or snags as well. Yeah, you can really see just like the scale and the density of wood. The density of wood was designed to replicate as best as researchers and the Forest Service know, like historic wood density in the system. So pretty crazy to see a river like this compared to a single threaded channel without that complexity. Okay, last slide on this project.
Maybe. Uh-oh.
What if we go?
Oh, right there. There we go.
I'm going to show this photo too to show like the human scale of these projects. There's us with those huge log jams in the background. This project took collaboration between a ton of public and private agencies, public utilities, the Forest Service, the Mackenzie River Trust, which helped with like land acquisition. Our designer from the Forest Service is on the right side, Kate Meyer, and I'm all the way on the left. Our engineers, some of whom are in the middle of this image, helped with floodplain permitting and design as well. Yeah.
What would you say, at least for like wolf water involved in the project, was like the ratio of time spent like on logistics and planning versus like field work and all that stuff, like outside kind of?
That's a great question. Yeah. I mean, there are studies and like site visits that have to happen during the planning phase. There's probably like a week of wetland delineation. We did a lot of our like coordination and stuff on desktop though. These projects have been like in the planning works for like probably 7 years before implementation started. And then implementation happened over two kind of extended summer seasons. So maybe like 6 to 9 months of like groundwork where there's heavy equipment redistributing all those sediment, dropping logs in where they're planned to go, and like 5 years before that of like planning, permitting, getting funding, obtaining like land rights, all that. So
Okay,
Yeah, and I'm gonna get into it in some slides too, what our actual like day-to-day assessments like in the field look like. But there are people at Wolf too. It kind of depends on your position, how much you're in the field, how much you're in the office. But some of our staff are out on these sites during construction, like during the entire construction. So we have team members that are out for weeks at a time, sometimes camping for some of our more remote projects. But hopefully more like in hotels, but on the project site every day to make sure that the log jams, habitat structures go in the way that it was designed.
awesome. Okay, I'm gonna pass the mic to Lauren now to discuss OPRD project.
Yeah, so just to give you a slightly different example of the projects that we work on, this is one that's currently happening right now that I'm really excited about. Is the Beaver Creek Boardwalk project with the Oregon Parks and Rec Department. So in addition to watershed councils and nonprofits, we also work with state organizations like Oregon and Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife and city and statewide parks and rec departments. So for this project, OPRD wants to build a boardwalk through the Beaver Creek estuary because the Beaver Creek estuary lies within a state natural area. And on the north side of the estuary is their visitor center. And on the south side of the estuary is about, I think, like half a dozen miles of trails. And in the summer, there's a trail through the estuary. So visitors can get from one to the other. But in the winter, when the water comes up, visitors are completely cut off. Whether they go to the visitor center, they can't access the trails, or whether they're hiking, they realize they can't get to the visitor center. So we got pulled into this project because the Beaver Creek estuary is essential salmonid habitat. It is utilized by a number of Endangered Species Act or ESA listed fish species. So it'll be a really great project. The planned construction is for 2027. This is our pictures from the Beaver Creek estuary. The boardwalk itself will be going in where the red boundary is. And that's actually along the path of a historic cattle path that's pretty beaten into the ground there. You can see that that's a kind of brown trail. And in addition to the entire boardwalk going through sensitive tidal wetlands, there's multiple stream crossings as well. So while OPRD wants to build their boardwalk, they'll also be removing two, I think, 100-year-old culverts that are over those stream crossings. So those culverts were put in during the estuary's agricultural use, and now they're almost completely filled in with sediment. But you wouldn't think it by looking at the aerial, but the almost pencil straight stream there is called Simpson Creek. Every time I've been out there, it's just packed with baby coho, and coho are ESA listed as threatened. So the project, in addition to allowing recreational users to actually access the trails in the visitor center, it'll be really beneficial for fish passage in the future. And then OPRD, once the boardwalk goes in, they do also want to re-meander and restore Simpson Creek. For this project, we've done a number of environmental assessments already. So we've done habitat mapping of wetlands and streams out there, and we've also done functional assessments to quantify the existing functioning of those aquatic ecosystems. And this is currently one of my favorite projects because I think it's a good example of how our projects can be a win-win for both people and for nature. And Natalie and I have both mentioned a number of times environmental permitting. So one of the things that we do as environmental consultants is apply for permits to all these different regulatory agencies. Both of the projects that we've mentioned and most of the projects that we work on require permits from the agencies that are on the board, plus others that aren't shown here. At a federal level, the Corps, the U.S. Army Corps Corps of Engineers often become involved whenever you're proposing impacts to wetlands or waters. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA, or the National Marine Fish Service, gets involved whenever there are ESA listed species or habitats either in your project area or very close by, which they often are. We're often working in waters that have ESA listed fish species in them. At a state level, we are very often working with the Oregon Department of State Lands and Department of Environmental Quality, because those two organizations at a state level have been charged with inventorying and protecting wetlands and waters of Oregon. And then ODFW, Oregon Fish and Wildlife Department, comes into play pretty much whenever we are, again, working in waters that are fish bearing or have those ESA listed fish species, and whenever our projects propose to either temporarily or permanently affect fish passage, even if we are planning to restore fish passage or make it better. And then at a local level, for Finrock, Lane County was involved, and for Beaver Creek, Lincoln County is involved, because you very often need at least floodplain permits to actually do development or work in a floodplain, because they are tasked by FEMA with making sure that any work in waters doesn't result in an increased flood risk to neighboring properties or roads or infrastructure or anything like that. So our role in part as environmental permitters is to communicate with these regulatory agencies and explain to them what the benefit of these projects are, because even temporary impacts for environmental restoration are still impacts. We're also tasked with identifying the exact regulatory action that we're proposing. So if we're proposing to move a culvert, if we're proposing to grade out a certain amount of earth or install a certain amount of log structures, those are all sort of elements that need permitted by all of these agencies plus some. And this is really important because the agencies also have specific designs. If they are saying, okay, we'll allow you to do a project, we'll give you a permit, they have specific design criteria that they want to see wrapped into our engineering designs for the project. And on a day-to-day basis for those environmental permits, as well as just to better understand our site, we do a lot of environmental assessments. So we're very often in the field mapping out the existing habitats and identifying any sensitive species that might be there or other sensitive habitats. We do a lot of functional assessments too. So Oregon and Washington and a number of other states have statewide functional assessments to help you quantify the existing function of environment. So, for example, we're that picture on the left, or I guess that's on the right, is of myself and one of our colleagues out doing it's called a stream functional assessment method. And you pretty often need to do those whenever you're proposing impacts to waters in Oregon. So it is a way of quantifying things like the existing fish habitat, a stream's connection with its floodplain or its water quality function. And that's all important. So that way you can explain, this is what the environment looks like now. And then you can also predict how you think your project will influence it in the future, because you have to actually provide evidence that your restoration project is going to make things better before it's permitted. Because we work in water so much, we often are doing macroinvertebrate surveys. We do a lot of fish passage evaluations and applications, and those are usually multifaceted. We work with our engineers and geomorphologists on those too. We do a lot of fish salvage prior to construction, and then we spend a lot of our time as environmental consultants coordinating and communicating, whether that's with landowners around the project area that are concerned, or funders. Funders want to know exactly how a project is progressing throughout each step that they're funding, and then with regulatory agencies as well.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so in addition to those specific services that we provide as ecologists in our firm, we also wanted to share kind of some like broad categories of skills that are used in environmental consulting and would look great on a resume in application to an environmental consulting firm. We kind of divided these into hard skills and soft skills. One category isn't more valuable than the other, but by hard, we just mean specific, like commonly defined and understood skills that can be addressed through like a specific training or an established route. Research and writing is a huge part of what we do, writing permits and developing clear, compelling arguments for why our projects need to happen and how they're in compliance with federal and state laws. GPS, GIS skills. We're constantly in the field using GPSs to map potential regulatory boundaries of wetlands and waters. Producing maps is a big way of how we communicate location and quality of resources to clients, regulatory agencies, etc. Drone piloting, we collect a lot of aerial imagery for our projects. That's used to both communicate the project site to funders or the public. Sometimes we even use drone imagery for like post-construction monitoring. There's a photo on the right of our coworker Jeremiah, who's an FAA certified drone pilot. Data management, Excel, being a good steward of the data you collect in the field. Plant and vegetation community ID. This is something that like I really had to rebuild moving to Oregon from California, but being able to kind of like read a landscape and read what like an assemblage of plants is telling you about the hydrology or disturbances in that landscape. Wetland delineation methods, mapping the jurisdictional boundaries of wetlands and waters on a site. Those boundaries and the actions within them are regulated. Fish handling and identification, macro invertebrate sampling, and then just generally knowledge of environmental laws and regulations. Okay, softer skills, or skills that are just like developed over time. Critical thinking, often, we're trying to translate what we're seeing in the environment to a form or a regulated process. And nature is messy. So being able to kind of like read a situation and conceptualize what's going on there, even if it doesn't match what your desktop research has led you to believe. Communication, again, interpreting natural features, wetlands and waters to our partners, project stakeholders, engineering staff, regulators. Organization, these projects are really long, like the Finrock project went over like 7 years. Being able to hold a thread and keep good notes, crucial. Creativity and flexibility, and then, having a good attitude about field work, navigating off-trail, uneven terrain, all sorts of weather conditions. The photo on the right is my coworker, Emily. We went out to Silver Falls State Park a few Decembers ago and had to do a delineation in the snow, but still had a good time.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So which hard skills and soft skills do you feel your degree program did not prepare you for that you had to learn through the job?
It's a good question. I feel like a lot of, I'll just speak for myself first, and then maybe I'll have to. I feel like a lot of classes in college gave me kind of like a good first blush on these topics. But yeah, having to apply them to a novel situation where you don't have the constraints of like a lab or a controlled experiment, that really like cemented the learning for me. Yeah, even the troubleshooting that goes into like day-to-day work, especially with like GIS, I feel like that was like really cemented at work. Both of us took like supplementary GIS coursework. I was required to take like one GIS class for my degree, and I begrudged it because I thought, well, I want to be in the field all the time. I don't want to be in the office. But that's such a valuable skill. And I certainly, yeah, my GIS skills were much more like saleable to potential employers after I did that like supplementary coursework. Yeah, I would say like a lot of the like field skills, some of them you can gain through like research experience in undergrad. But I think it also just like depends what opportunities are available to you. Did you wanna?
Yeah. Explicitly for me, the wetland delineation methods of fish handling and macroinvertebrate surveys, I was lucky, like I said, I got to tag along with my undergrad advisor and help him do some macroinvertebrate stream bug work. But I didn't have any sort of like coursework that was related to that. The wetland delineation and fish handling, that all came much later while I started working. So even if you, I mean, it's great, of course, to get research experience in an undergrad that would, help you build those tools. But if you find yourself after graduation not having those skills, you can also like volunteer with local groups that are doing that too, just to say that you're familiar with whatever the survey methods that they use are, whatever fish you handle. It's better than no fish if you, want to be in some sort of aquatic position. And then soft skills.
I think you certainly build them during starting in undergrad for sure,
Yeah.
or earlier.
The communication piece, I think, for me, for undergrad, I mean, that's just, that is just something that you build with time in your profession. Of course, I'm sure there's opportunities to gain that in undergrad too, if you want to be part of organizations where you might have to speak or actually organize events. That can be, even if it's not like in a science realm, that can still look really good to any sort of employer in the future. And then you're all students now. I hope you enjoy being students because even after you get your bachelor's or your master's, if you do get an advanced degree, if you want a career in science, we're kind of required to always be learning. Things are constantly changing, both at like an upper regulatory level with changing administrations and policies. And then, of course, the science that we work with is constantly evolving. Our understanding of these complex ecosystems that we work in is always getting better. So it's really important to stay up to date on that sort of stuff in order to do good science in your job. So Natalie and I are still learning. Obviously, we take short form professional trainings, usually multiple times a year. So a lot of these trainings and programs on the board are ones that we have taken while working or our colleagues have taken and we utilize very often in our day-to-day work. And we'll also, Fred has the presentation. So hopefully if anyone wants to see it, because we've added hyperlinks to a lot of these if you want to check them out. And if you're interested in river restoration or environmental consulting in general, there's a lot of future career options for you, specifically in environmental restoration work. So at a federal government level, there are jobs at the Environmental Protection Agency. The Army Corps of Engineers is very often working in waters. And then our national level resource management agencies like the Forest Service, BLM, and USGS. At a local or state level, most cities and counties have some sort of environmental positions. And then the Oregon Department of State Lands and Oregon Department of Environmental Quality, I know they have a lot of job openings right now. They're kind of constantly looking for people in the environmental space. And then I think every county in Oregon has its own soil and water conservation district, and they're really great. They do really good work both in the aquatic and then like meadow and forest ecosystems too with restoration and preservation. There's lots of nonprofits. There's a few that are dedicated specifically to restoration and protection of the Columbia River. Land trusts and watershed councils also do really fantastic projects. And then, of course, if you're interested in private consulting, pretty much any interest you might have in the environmental sciences space, I would bet money that there is a consulting firm out there doing that work and therefore that has jobs in that area of interest. So where can you actually find these jobs with these employers? You can check out these job boards. You can sign up to get like weekly email updates from some of them. I have gotten jobs from some of these job boards here that we've got listed. Going to things like career fairs and conferences is a really good way to connect. Well, first of all, to identify employers that you might be interested in, and then connect with some of their staff. And you can just casually ask them questions in like an informal setting that doesn't have the same pressure as a formal job interview. Then most states, including Oregon and Washington, do have specific statewide job boards where I know for Oregon, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, DSL, DEQ post all of their state jobs on workday.com, I believe it is. And then Washington, the equivalent to Washington is careers.wa.gov. And Washington state organizations like WDFW and the Department of Ecology post their jobs there. And then if you're interested in private consulting, I highly recommend checking out that firm's website and following them on LinkedIn, because those will be the two places that they will post their job openings first.
Okay, we brainstormed together some general advice for folks interested in careers in the natural resource field, especially right out of undergrad. First, we wanted to ask you all to consider your lifestyle. Do you want to be on the field full time? Are you less comfortable with that? Would you prefer an office-based job? There's lots of options out there, but consider, yeah, your day-to-day life in a job to make sure it's something that works for you and would make you happy, or at least not miserable. Be intentional about geography. A lot of the value we provide clients as ecologists is familiarity with a specific region's ecosystems and species and regulations. So if you're from Florida and you really want to move back to Florida eventually, apply for jobs in the Southeast. Like, you'll be building experience and familiarity with those ecosystems and the regulations around natural resources in that region. And it'll only make you more like appealing to potential employers. Seasonal work. There are a lot of like entry-level seasonal positions offered to folks in like environmental sciences generally. Seasonal work can be a great way to gain a broad variety of experiences with lots of different species or ecosystems or climates. It's kind of like a low commitment way to like dip your toes in. Like, you could do a season, like a summer field season with like wildlife biology, or in a desert ecosystem. And if you don't like it, you're probably only there for a few months and you'll be out of there soon enough. Or you might find what you really want to invest like the rest of your career or your time in graduate school in. So consider, yeah, the upsides of seasonal work.
Yeah, and then we thought a good rule of thumb when you're considering a job with a specific team is, do you want your potential boss's job? You know, if you look at your potential boss and you're like, man, they've got really impressive skills and have really cool experiences. If you think that, then that job is probably a good fit for you at that phase in your career. And we think it's really important that everyone works for an employer who will actually invest in you. So make sure your employer will pay for training and continued education. You can find that out again if you're able to talk to staff at career fairs, or even get someone's email and email them, just ask like, what does your training situation look like? Or if you're in an interview, you can ask a potential employer, how often are your employees going to short form trainings throughout the year? And then, you know, I don't believe everyone needs to go to graduate school. I have my master's, but Natalie and a number of our colleagues didn't get advanced degrees. It's not actually a requirement in the natural sciences, but we both think that seasonal work is super important when you're first starting out, or entry-level jobs, something that will get you really good hands-on experience right after undergrad. And then if you decide you do want an advanced degree, I remember when I was first reaching out to who at the time was my potential grad advisor and then ended up being my graduate advisor. When I sent my resume to him, I remember being really kind of mortified by like what I thought was like this mess of a resume, because I had all these different kind of what I thought were disconnected experiences. I had like bat surveys and fish habitat construction and park education on there. But my grad advisor saw that as just a strong, diverse skill set. So don't be afraid to follow your interests and try out different positions, especially early on in your career. You don't know where they could take you. They could end up all being really important.
Thanks.
Mhm.
Our last slide. Yeah, we want to thank you all for coming today, listening to our talk, and say, regardless of your degree path or specialty or interest within the broader environmental sciences field, there's likely a job out there for you with an agency or a consulting firm. It just takes a little research and networking. So we hope the information that we shared today provided you with at least a better understanding of what environmental consulting is, what our work does, and what skills that you could build to become an excellent candidate to work in environmental consulting or for an agency in the future. The QR codes on the slide, if you take your phone and hover over them with the camera, they'll link to our contact information if you want to contact us for some other reason after the presentation today. We also have some business cards up on the front table, and we're available now if you have any other questions. Thanks.
Yeah, folks, if you have questions, let's do those now. And I have a couple questions online that are coming up as well.
Okay.
So does anyone in the room want to get us started with the question?
Yeah, I see someone.
Yeah, I'll do it. Okay, all right. I was just wondering, is there anything, I mean, you kind of talked about the period in between undergrad and graduate school. Is there any, I wonder, could we?
I'm gonna grab the microphone.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And that way we
Online
can make
people.
sure everyone can hear you.
Alrighty. I was just wondering about how taking time between undergrad and graduate school, is there anything you would recommend for people, either the types of jobs to look for? Would you, for like a broad array of things, or like how much time do you want to spend before you go back to school?
Good question.
10 seconds to ponder that. Put the microphone over.
It's a really good question. I think obviously it's going to vary by the person. I usually recommend that students do work for a while after undergrad, just because graduate school, just because you go to grad school for one thing doesn't mean that is set in stone for your career for the rest of your life, but you do end up specializing. So, if you are looking at finishing your undergrad degree and you're uncertain of what you want to do, it's in a general field, but you don't know the exact grad degree you want to go for, then yeah, work for, I think I took 3 or 4 years between my undergrad and grad. And I think I had 2 different seasonal positions plus my first consulting job. So that's 3 total, which really helped me narrow down what I was interested in. But of course, if you are an undergraduate student and you want a master's and you have a grad professor offering you a graduate assistantship, it's a pretty sweet deal. So, that sort of thing is hard to pass up unless it's not in your interested field, obviously. But yeah, I think getting a variety of experiences is really good. Like I said, my seasonals and then even my first consulting job, I thought weren't really related at all. They were all in the sciences, but yeah, they ended up being attractive to graduate professors in the way that it was just building a strong skill set. Yeah.
Question. Can we do one online real quick? So online question, would you recommend getting a GIS certificate or simply taking a few classes? Would that be enough?
I think it really depends on you and your learning style. I went through like a full certificate program because it offered the breadth of classes I was interested in, like gaining skills in beyond cartography, like vector and raster data analysis and modeling and Python and things like that. Most of which I don't really use today, but I like the structure of the program. I think in general, like pursuing GIS coursework is a great thing, especially to like build work samples. That's something I've like asked for sure in like interviews before, to just kind of like get a read on where someone's at with like their cartography skills at least. Yeah, I think like ultimately like any degree or certificate program, it is like a communicable like path you've taken, but like ultimately what matters is, can you do the work, and like can you analyze GIS data and like make map products without the confines or like kind of cookbook style like lab of like a GIS class. I don't know.
I took my online GIS courses were part of a certificate program, but I did not actually finish the whole list of the whole suite of the classes that were in that certificate program. I just really wanted a working experience, specifically of the Arc Pro software, which we use all the time for mapping. And so I got that with like 2 online courses. So even if on your resume you can list your familiarity with those sort of tools, that's great.
Cool. And yeah, another question in the room here?
So, I'm just curious on, since I know a lot of us in the room are, wanting to get like internships and jobs, and as a non-government organization, are you guys aware of any, if you guys are hiring, for internships or jobs or like entry-level stuff, or any other NGOs that might be? Oh, or any advice to get into those? Sorry.
Sure.
Thanks. We don't have like a formal regular internship program right now at our company, but we do hire entry-level staff. Yeah, I would say if you're interested in working with us specifically, like at our firm on LinkedIn, that's like Lauren said, where we'll post job openings first. Yeah, I would say like some firms do offer like internship opportunities. I think like Fred mentioned, like networking is super important. Attending career fairs, seeing who is hiring. And then yeah, I would say like also developing your resume, trying to build those skills. Also like generally like look at job ads that you're interested in for positions you're interested in and look at the skills requested or desired, and see how you can like build those skills or match your resume to address those desires.
And then I'll add on for the networking part, a lot of firms and companies don't necessarily advertise their internships, like with a formal job posting. Because in my understanding, the couple of interns that we've had, it was kind of like a word of mouth thing and it wasn't an official posting. So if you are interested in a specific firm or someone you met and you're like, wow, they do cool stuff, just follow up with them and say, do you or anyone else that you know that does similar work, do they have internships? Because yeah, sometimes that's enough to get you in the door talking to people, and yeah, that can really help.
Yeah, I think they called it the invisible job market, right? It's not posted, but that doesn't mean that you can't create a good conversation that leads to referrals and people wanting to kind of connect with you more. So another question from Zoom. Are there positions that you would recommend for someone who wants or needs an office position?
Yeah, I think those like critical questions to ask in an interview or like ask of a firm that you're interested in working for, but isn't necessarily like flying open positions at the moment. Ask them what kind of projects they work on, what that looks like on the day-to-day, what skills they're using. I guess like general like search terms you could use on like LinkedIn if you're generally interested in like environmental science consulting but don't want to be in the field. You could be like a project coordinator, which is most of the time like an office-based position, organizing all the pieces of a project. Project coordinator, an environmental permitting specialist. Permitting is like largely an office job, though occasionally we do site visits. Yeah, would you add anything?
Yeah, I would say if you're interested in fully office-based work, looking at those really large companies, they'll tend to be the ones that will post either fully office-based jobs or will be more okay with that, because at a small firm, Wolf is only like 35 people. So even like our principals, our firm owners, they're experts, but they're going out in the field too. Like we're all going out in the field because there's just not enough people to have, a field crew plus fully office-based work. So those larger companies probably have jobs that can be done from home.
One more thing I was going to add, say you got a degree in environmental science, the inclination might be to immediately like search for jobs that are listed as environmental scientist. But I would also encourage you to like think outside of that framework. And again, look at like agencies, nonprofits, consulting firms you're interested in working on with because you like the projects that they do. Maybe they have, like my first office-based consulting job was as a technical editor for a biological review program. So I wasn't being a biologist, but I was like adjacent to it, gained experience, and then yeah, I did become a biologist with that firm. So think beyond the like project just or like job name.
Good advice. All right, other questions? Want to go? You want to go again?
I think someone over.
Who else was raising?
I
their
think
hands? Thank you.
Sort of along those lines. How distinct are the roles later on as far as like engineer versus ecologist? How much overlap is there?
Good question.
Great question. Yeah, I would think at our firm, there are two distinct tracks. Being an engineer in like the state of Oregon, where you can stamp plan sets and ensure that the plan sets you've created or the project you've designed comply with like engineering standards of the state, requires getting certified as a professional engineer, which requires coursework, like a 4-year degree in engineering, and passing the PE test. So I certainly would not call ourselves engineers, like we're not on that path. That being said, like in restoration, the lines between like designer and ecologist are a little bit squishy. The Finrock project that I talked about earlier, the design was actually done by a fisheries biologist with the Forest Service. Her plans were reviewed by engineers and they ultimately stamped them. But ecologists can certainly like inform on goals of design. Does that answer your question? Yes. Did you add anything? Sure.
Yeah, again, it might really vary based on the firm size that you're working at. So because we're so small, and it is one of our principles kind of to include all the different facets of our staff, which is geomorphologists, engineering and biologists, we're all in design meetings. So, you know, the engineers are there obviously talking about what the plans could look like. And we're conversing with them, you know, on the whiteboard, like drawing, you know, like crazy with all of our ideas that are coming out. So we're there working with them too. The engineers are just the ones that officially draw it up and stamp it. But yeah, the small firm biologists definitely play a role. At a larger firm, I don't know if that would be the case as much.
Cool. Yeah, we had a question online that was relevant to that. So on the engineering side, what kind of involvement do the engineers you work with have in the ecological and environmental studies form in the subject areas? Anything to add? Kind of similar, but
yeah, a lot of the engineers at our firm went through a specific like environmental engineering program at OSU. We have some engineers who did like traditional civil engineering programs with like a specialty in water resources maybe. But most of the engineers at our firm, yeah, were like trained in like ecological design. So like engineering natural systems rather than infrastructure, like hard infrastructure. Yeah. Do you add anything?
Yeah, specifically to the environmental assessments.
Yeah.
So the environmental assessments piece, I would say that's mostly done by the biologists. However, the engineers need to know the site too. So very often they're some of the first people along with us, the biologists, that are on the ground looking at a site with the project partners before we're even contracted to be working on it. And then if it's a really big site, if the engineer has been there more, they'll be out with us, guiding us through the site as we're doing the environmental assessments. So they might not be actually assisting with the assessments, but they get field time too, because they need to know these sites pretty much as well as we do.
One last thing I'll add is that, yeah, we do go back and forth with the engineers. The extent of like wetlands and waters that we map in the field following wetland delineation methodology, we give those to the engineers and those go into the plans. And then after the design's done, the engineers like use those overlapping like actions in wetlands and waters to calculate quantities that we've translated into permitting documents. So there's a lot of back and forth between us.
great. There's more questions online, but I want to give a chance for folks here in the room.
Okay, what like advice or tips would you give to like low-level undergraduates who want to get into research in like the ecology field of like river restoration and all that, but don't know where to start?
Would you start?
I would say it depends what type of research you want to do. I know lots of people who have professions in the academic realm. So they go for their whatever it is, master's, PhD, and they continue work as postdocs, as faculty research assistants that really get to dive in to whatever their research question is, and that's really cool. I would say in our specifically environmental consulting, we are very often answering questions for clients. So we do sometimes do studies where we're doing, work on the ground, collecting data to answer a specific question. But as far as consulting, we don't do as much research, hard research as like in the academic track.
Okay.
If that helps.
Sorry, I was more asking, it's like, we were talking about like your pathways to get to being where you are in consulting now. You said that you did like a lot of stuff while you're undergraduate. I was more asking like, what were some big things in the process of being involved with those research opportunities when you were still an undergraduate?
Like, what did I do or how did I get?
Yeah, like how did you get there? Like, what do you think are some really important steps to take?
Yeah, I think that I was lucky because like I said, that was my undergraduate advisor, but I was just open with him and said, hey, I'm really interested in this. Cause like I said, I just tagged along with him. It wasn't even really an open position. I know that there's at OSU and I'm sure at other universities, there's those research experiences for undergrad programs, and those are awesome. I worked with a lot of RUs when I was doing my master's, and those students got, field experience, lab experience, all sort of research experience that they want. But again, if you just know someone that's doing cool work, and you can even volunteer, like I said, for like watershed councils, they're out in the field doing stuff all the time. So even if you're like able to go out and do like a field day with them or a couple field days, at least you can say you're familiar with whatever methods they were doing, data collection, macro river fish work, whatever it is.
Okay, thanks.
Go back to online. You talked about hard and soft skills, but I wanted to ask about technical skills you find beneficial in restoration, like wildland firefighting training or chainsaw training. No, this can vary based on location, position, and program, but are there any that you find helpful to gain early on? So technical skills.
Yeah, I think, wildland firefighting and all the like technical and mechanical skills that go with it are relevant in our field, especially if you're on like the implementation side of things. For our work, which primarily focuses around permitting and restoring wetlands and waters, I guess like really important technical skills, I would say would be wetland delineation methods, identifying the soil, plant, and hydrology conditions that define wetlands. That's a really important technical skill set for our work, river restoration. Anything?
Yeah, if you've got some like chainsaw experience, I would say nonprofits could be a really good avenue into using those skills in this sort of work. Watershed councils in Washington, an equivalent to that would be like the fish enhancement groups that are nonprofits doing really cool fish habitat work. They usually try to do as much in-house as possible. So if you have a really cool skill like that is needed by that sort of group, that could be really attractive to them, so they don't have to hire that out, for someone that's not already in their organization.
I had a question about, okay.
Question in the back.
I'm wondering if as folks that have a large skill set, as you were describing with disparate experiences, How do you effectively communicate that without handing somebody a 10-page resume?
Yeah.
A 3-page resume, nobody wants to read.
Great question. Yeah, I would say keep your resume to 1 page, if at all
Did
possible.
two. Almost always do 2
We still
pages.
hired her, so. I mean, just like formatting wise, like some of those skills like GIS, familiarity with like GPS tools, wetland delineation, things like that, those can be a bulleted list.
Mhm.
And they're like entry points into larger conversations with an interviewer. I think in general, like descriptions of like what you did at a job can get like wordy on a resume. So I know I feel like this is really common advice, but it's so true. Like tailoring your resume exactly to the position you're applying for, like looking at the skills desired and highlighting those exact terms and words on your resume and in the job experiences, crucial. So like, yeah, having like a 1 sentence description of like what you did for like 2 years at an organization isn't a bad thing. Especially if you have like juicy terms in there that are relevant to the job you're applying for, they can just be entry points into like, yeah, more detailed conversation.
Mhm. Yeah, I'd say the bulleted list, like I think for my resume, I had like my past 3 most recent experiences with like a few bullets narrative, and then for everything that didn't fit in there, just like an other technical experiences section where you can just list out everything. Either in a bulleted list, or it doesn't even have to be bulleted because that could take up more space. You know, it can just be like a long string of all of the skills or the, methods that you're familiar with. Because a lot of times, my understanding now, a lot of companies use AI to like filter our resumes. So like if you don't want to not include, if you don't want to leave something off your list just in case that AI filter is looking for it, yeah, just like an other technical experiences section could be good. You don't really need explanation for those sort of things.
It's a great note about, yeah, AI filtering. I think that's like long held true for federal jobs also, applied through USA Jobs, like really matching the exact terms they're looking for in the position, so long as it's truthful for you, is key to getting past like the initial like computer screening.
And there was a question about these links. I'll be sending the slide deck with the live links that you guys kindly provided. So for those of you in the chat, those will be available with the slide deck in an email in the next day or so. Okay, another question from Zoom. So this individual says they're a non-traditional students and have a career already. So seasonal work as part of their career change is kind of a no-go, they're stating. But they work in tourism and are familiar with permitting and US FS regulations, NEPA, etc. Would it be adequate, or a lack of seasonal work would be a hindrance to a career change? So I think, is seasonal work something relevant for even someone who's kind of mid-career and is looking for a career change?
I think it's totally not a requirement, even if you're like fresh out of undergrad. Yeah, having experience with other agencies, regulations, and NEPA is totally transferable. So I would, yeah, if you're interested in getting into like environmental permitting, and regulations, highlight that experience on your resume. Yeah, I think also like having, kind of adjacent but similar experience is like really attractive to an employer. Like I had a job doing permitting in California with the National Park Service before I started working with Wolf, and had moved to a new geography against our advice, and was not familiar with like environmental regulations up here, but because I had like worked with federal permitting before, my boss at the time saw that as desirable and like relevant skill set and experience. Yeah. Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay, I have a question. How scary was it for you when you're approaching graduation in your undergrad? And can you talk about how you kind of got your feet wet in your professional careers?
You're in first.
Yeah, I was like totally terrified when I graduated undergrad because I don't think I'd had a job set up yet, at least in my field. I had some job lined up at home, I think in a restaurant or something. I'd applied for a number of seasonals, a lot of which, probably just filled up, before I'd applied, or, by people who are more qualified. But, within a few weeks of graduating, I did land one of the seasonals I had applied for. And it was a really fun one. So, things can just take time. There was a number of positions that I had applied for both right after graduation, then even after my first seasonal, that I was like really excited about and didn't end up getting. And then a kind of like a secondary application I'd sent into a different position ended up interviewing me, and I would take those, and it would end up being great experience. So, don't let yourself get too hung up on one type of job. You can get good experience no matter what you end up landing.
I had a terrible time, like final semester of college. It was so stressful. Because I was just like staring down, lack of employment with a lot of fear. I was living in the Bay Area also, which is like an incredibly expensive place to live. It really impacted job market for environmental sciences generally. And I didn't feel like my research experience skills were like translating to jobs I was applying for. So I had a job like brewing kombucha and washing dishes at like a restaurant in Berkeley for a few weeks after graduation, and then heard back from like a job I had interviewed and applied for like months earlier, and ended up taking it and working a season at Maria's National Seashore, which is awesome. So I don't know, I guess like my advice to my past self in the last semester of college would be to just like lock down a job first, like bare minimum financial requirements. If you're not getting bites on jobs in alignment with like your degree path.
The kombucha thinks you know all about SCOBY and everything.
Yeah, very familiar.
Other questions in the room? Yeah.
I'm a fourth year on my way out, and I also I find grad school just like pretty feasible, but I'm also in that kind of position where it's just a ton of interest, and I need to narrow it down, but I really don't know what, especially with that lack of experience because of school. So what was your kind of light bulb moment for that going towards grad school?
Good question. Yeah, I would say, I mean, we sound like broken records at this point, but the seasonal work, like Natalie said earlier, like dipping your toe in, to really figure out what you're interested in, and just as importantly, what you're not interested in. Because I had, actually it was my first full-time consulting job, and it wasn't consulting that I didn't like, but I just realized that I was much more interested in the aquatic realm than I was terrestrial, because I was doing a lot of terrestrial work with that job. But with one of my seasonals I'd done, actually two of my seasonals, I did a lot of aquatic work. So just getting the varied experience. And there's no timeline on it. Like I said earlier, if you get offered a graduate assistantship, that's great. It would probably be hard to pass up, especially if it was in one of your fields that you're interested in. But graduate professors, at least in this field, they're trying to hire people who will do research and work for them. So they want to see someone come in with some skills, even if they're super varied from a few positions that lasted 3 months. So that can be helpful and help you figure out what you want to do.
There was a clarifying question about the QR codes that were provided, and specifically, what's the best way to reach out and what kinds of follow-ups are welcome? Just a little clarification on that. Thanks.
The QR codes should work by hovering your phone's camera over them. We can advance on the slide.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Our emails are also listed there. We do welcome, I'll speak for myself, I guess. I do welcome letters of interest for folks who just graduated and are interested in like a career in environmental consulting. Otherwise, you're welcome to like look, I would say either of us up on LinkedIn, Lauren Zatkos, Natalie Holt. We'll both be there. You can tell it's us because it'll say we work at Wolf Water Resources. And we could connect on there. And again, we often will post new job openings on like LinkedIn, one of the first places in addition to our website.
Yeah, and like we said earlier, if you're interested in jobs at specific firms, you can look at their web pages, but also if you want to just email us and say, hey, I'm interested in X type of field or X type of work, people that are actively working in the sort of area that we do, we know a lot of groups that we didn't talk about today, that we didn't list, whether they've been project partners or even competing firms. Like we know a lot of people who do really similar work, so we could have good ideas of where to point you for something specific.
Thank you so much. All right. Any other questions? I see hands. Maybe we could do two questions side by side.
I had a question about the GIS experience. I've gotten the GIS certificate. I'm in my 4th year, and then I'm just curious, like, what skills you use in the field, and if any other programs besides ArcPro are used. I guess mine is also a technical kind of thing. I was questioning what permitting really means, because you keep mentioning it. I'm coming from a background with some like policy management, but I'm curious, like, are you doing all of the full proposals for the larger agencies, like with every regulation of like the SPA, ODF, all that stuff?
Sorry.
You talked about permitting.
Okay.
You want to talk about TIA?
Sure.
Okay.
Thanks.
I'll address the permitting question. What does that mean? Good question. We are basically charged with making sure our projects can like legally happen in compliance with various laws at the federal, state, and local levels that protect species and habitats. So we are often kind of like analyzing project actions to see what they're proposing and what those like triggers for like applications for compliance with like the Clean Water Act look like. A lot of that like on the day-to-day is like coordinating with a project team to understand potential like regulatory actions for months in advance of like actually talking to folks at the agency. And then we basically like build like an understanding familiarity with like the language of environmental regulations and permitting, and are tasked with like presenting the projects to regulators and identifying the pathway to make these projects legally happen. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, right on. I would say just like relevant environmental laws, you know, I don't memorize them, know the ins and outs, but like knowing where your resources are. The laws that affect our work often, Clean Water Act, Oregon Removal Fill Law, things like that. Some of those trainings on the like skill development slide, like the Northwest Environmental Training Center have classes on like specific laws even to just like give you a baseline familiarity with them.
In the GIS question, you're asking like specific skills and softwares and stuff.
Yeah, if there's other programs than ArcPro, because I've definitely only learned ArcPro pretty much. And then like what you mentioned, making maps and being able to display information, but do you use any, I think I was asking, do you use any like in the field? Like
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of field maps?
I haven't gotten to use it much, but I have
You
heard
know
of
it exists. Yeah, so that's like the field equivalent of ArcPro. So in the field, we're collecting a lot of our data for a lot of our different assessments with fields. It's pretty much just like a mobile interactive form of Pro. So we add, you know, all of our photos, all of our documentation, all of our quantifiable data pretty much goes into there. Similarly, I know ODFW uses Survey 123, which I think is an ARC software as well,
Yeah.
maybe.
I
Yeah.
think it's now part of Field Maps.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I
Yeah.
didn't know that. And then there's also a free version of ArcPro. What's that called?
QGIS.
QGIS.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one's growing in popularity too. Some people at our firm use it. I use Pro still because that's what I learned. So Pro's still pretty big. And then along with that, we don't use it a ton. We do some, and other firms might use it more. I know the state uses it a lot. Statistical programs like R and Python is, and also in Pro, you can build models to kind of analyze your data that you collect in the field, in different ways. So all those softwares are ones that I know that people use in our kind of workspace.
Nice. Yeah, and again, the slides will be emailed out to you. Please make sure you scan the QR codes that are on the tables. Those of you online, I'll have your email addresses, so you'll get those. I'll get those from you. We have time for maybe one more question, maybe two, but we'll see.
Sorry, I just have one more quick question. Is there a way to learn environmental policy skills outside of my degree path? Because towards the end of my degree, I have everything planned out, but environmental policy is not part of it. Is there a way to learn those skills outside of it?
You want to?
Sure, yeah.
You said know your references, so maybe what are some of those references?
Yeah, I guess like environmental policy in general, environmental laws. Oh, I forgot I'm not.
Oh,
We have
yeah.
two screens
Take
going
that.
on, I thought.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the Northwest Environmental Training Center is a private company that does lots of different kinds of trainings relevant to environmental sciences. They have specific classes on like NEPA, the National Environmental Protection Act, and the Endangered Species Act, ESA. That could be a good way to kind of like get a baseline understanding of like what those laws govern and what they require and how they might apply to your future work. I would say like a lot of my experience with like environmental laws and understanding of how to permit our projects does come from like on the job training. Because yeah, often there isn't like a full coursework of like environmental regulations or policy in an environmental science degree. Yeah, so I would encourage, yeah, maybe taking one of those classes. There's lots of other options online too. Also, if you don't need like the structure of a formal like class or course, you could totally like do your own research. And I encourage that too.
Yeah, and I'll also say you don't feel like you have to have like everything down for especially like your first seasonal or full-time job. Even with my job at Wolf right now, I actually came here without like any restoration experience. I had a lot of the technical skills that I use today at Wolf, but I'd never used them with a restoration firm before. So I couldn't say I'd done any of it on restoration projects, but it was similar skills. And yeah, all scientists learn a lot on the job. So if you've got some of those technical skills down, yeah, I think that'll set you up pretty well for your first position.
All right, is there any more questions before we wrap things up? Let's see, any hands? Okay, I'll check one more time online. And thank you everyone online for joining us. So you guys you're gonna leave your cards here, is that right? So we have those. And there are events coming up, career fairs. I think you guys mentioned career fairs are a good idea to go to. So I have some posters of career fairs coming up that I'd like you to take the QR code if you're interested. And then I have my card here as well. I want to thank everyone for joining today. I always say to students, congratulations for showing up, because I think the first rule of professional development is you showed up, because you never know what can happen when you come to events like this. I think the Q&A was really good. If you have other questions, I think we have a few more minutes to be here. Maybe we can kind of give you a chance to chat a little bit. And I want to thank everyone again online for joining us. And I think that's us for today. So thank you guys for this, and thank you for joining.